Marcus Chun had always been quiet, but the kind of quiet that made smart people nervous. At 5'8" and barely 140 pounds, he looked like he belonged behind a computer screen rather than in the brutal world of Navy SEAL training. The other recruits at Basic Underwater Demolition / SEAL training in Coronado had sized him up within minutes of his arrival and decided he was an easy target. They were wrong about almost everything concerning Marcus Chun. The trouble started during Hell Week, that infamous period when SEAL instructors push recruits to their absolute breaking point. While other candidates were struggling through surf torture and endless physical challenges, Marcus moved through each task with mechanical precision. He never complained, never showed weakness, and never drew attention to himself. This should have earned respect, but instead, it seemed to irritate certain members of his class. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been watching the young recruit with growing interest. Something about Chin's movements reminded him of operators he'd worked with in classified missions overseas. The way Marcus handled weapons, his situational awareness, even his breathing patterns during combat simulations suggested training that went far beyond what any normal recruit should possess. But Marcus's file showed nothing unusual, just a college graduate from Seattle with a computer science degree. The harassment began small. Missing gear, sabotaged equipment, accidental collisions during training exercises. Marcus endured it all without complaint, which only seemed to encourage his tormentors. The ringleader was Jake Morrison, a former college football player from Texas who stood 6'4" and weighed 230 pounds of solid muscle. Morrison had 3 followers who hung on his every word: Tommy Santos from Boston, Derek Williams from Alabama, and Kevin O'Brien from Chicago. Morrison's crew represented everything wrong with military culture. They believed strength meant intimidation, and leadership meant domination. They saw Marcus as everything they despised: small, quiet, and seemingly weak. They decided to teach him a lesson about his place in their hierarchy. The assault happened on a Tuesday night after a particularly brutal training day. Marcus was alone in the equipment shed, cleaning his rifle with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows between the rows of military gear. Morrison and his crew cornered him there. Well, Morrison said, blocking the exit with his massive frame. "Look what we have here. Little Chun, playing soldier again." Marcus looked up from his weapon, his dark eyes unreadable. "Is there something you need, Morrison?" "Yeah, there's something I need." Morrison stepped closer, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I need you to understand that you don't belong here. This isn't a place for computer nerds and weaklings." Santos laughed from behind Morrison. "Maybe we should help him understand. Give him a real lesson in what military training looks like." Marcus carefully set down his rifle and stood up slowly. Even at his full height, he barely reached Morrison's shoulder. "I'm not looking for trouble." "Too bad," Williams said from the left side of the shed. "Because trouble found you." What happened next would be debated in military courts and investigated by federal authorities for months. Morrison grabbed Marcus by the front of his uniform, intending to slam him against the wall. It should have been easy. Morrison outweighed Marcus by nearly 100 pounds and had 6 inches of reach advantage. Instead, Morrison found himself flat on his back, gasping for air, with no clear memory of how he'd gotten there. Marcus hadn't moved fast. He'd moved precisely. One moment Morrison was reaching for him, and the next moment Morrison was on the ground with his wrist bent at an angle that suggested serious damage. The other 3 recruits stared in shock, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. "My wrist," Morrison gasped. "I think you broke my wrist." Marcus looked down at him with the same calm expression he wore during weapons training. "You grabbed me. I defended myself." O'Brien, the largest of Morrison's followers, stepped forward with his fists raised. "You little freak. What did you do to him?" Marcus shifted his weight almost imperceptibly, and something in his stance made O'Brien hesitate. For just a moment, the quiet recruit looked like something dangerous, something that had been hiding in plain sight. "I'd suggest you help your friend to medical," Marcus said quietly. "That wrist needs attention." Santos found his voice. "This isn't over, Chun. You just made the biggest mistake of your life." Marcus picked up his rifle and resumed cleaning it as if nothing had happened. "I don't think I did." The four recruits limped out of the equipment shed, Morrison cradling his injured wrist. They were angry, humiliated, and confused. More importantly, they were determined to get revenge. They began planning immediately, convinced that Chun had gotten lucky with some kind of martial arts move he'd learned from movies. They had no idea they were planning revenge against someone whose real training had never appeared in any official military file. Unknown to his tormentors, Marcus Chun wasn't just another recruit trying to become a SEAL. He was already something much more dangerous, operating under deep cover for reasons that would soon become terrifyingly clear to everyone involved. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez had been right to be suspicious. Marcus's movements, his calm under pressure, his precise reactions, these weren't the skills of a college graduate. They were the skills of someone who had been forged in conflicts that officially never happened, trained by instructors whose names appeared in no military database. As Morrison and his crew plotted their revenge, four SEAL colonels in a secure facility hundreds of miles away received a priority alert. Someone had just assaulted one of their most valuable assets. The asset had defended himself appropriately, but his cover might now be compromised. The colonels began making calls. Morrison and his friends had just declared war on someone they couldn't begin to understand. Worse, they had attracted the attention of four men who had built careers on making problems disappear permanently. The equipment shed fell quiet again as Marcus finished cleaning his rifle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new training exercises, and, very likely, new attempts at revenge for Morrison's crew. Marcus wasn't worried about any of it. He had survived much worse than anything four angry recruits could devise. What concerned him was whether he could maintain his cover long enough to complete his real mission. The assault had forced him to reveal skills that no ordinary recruit should possess. Soon, people would start asking questions. And when they did, Marcus Chun would have to decide whether to maintain his facade or reveal the truth that could change everything for everyone involved. The medical report on Jake Morrison's wrist raised immediate red flags throughout the command structure at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The injury wasn't just a simple break or sprain. According to the orthopedic specialist who examined Morrison, his wrist had been hyperextended and twisted with surgical precision, causing maximum pain and temporary disability while avoiding permanent damage. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the base's chief medical officer, had seen thousands of training injuries over her 15-year career. She treated everything from broken bones during Hell Week to concussions from combat training accidents. Morrison's injury was different. It showed a level of anatomical knowledge and precise application of force that suggested advanced training in martial arts or close-quarters combat. This wasn't done by accident, Dr. Martinez told Commander James Walsh during their morning briefing. Someone knew exactly how to disable this recruit without causing permanent harm. That's not the kind of technique you learn from watching movies or taking a few karate classes. Commander Walsh had been running SEAL training programs for 12 years. He prided himself on knowing every recruit in his facility, their backgrounds, their capabilities, and their potential problems. Marcus Chin's file showed nothing that would explain how a computer science graduate could inflict such a precise injury on a much larger opponent. "Tell me about Chun," Walsh said to Master Chief Peterson, his senior instructor. Peterson had been watching Marcus for weeks. "He's unusual, sir. Technically perfect in everything we throw at him, but there's something underneath. The way he handles weapons, his tactical awareness, his physical conditioning. It's like he's been through this before. His psychological evaluation? Clean. Too clean, maybe. No stress indicators, no anxiety about the training, no normal responses to the pressure we put on recruits. He responds to everything like it's routine." Walsh studied Marcus's file again. Born in Seattle to immigrant parents, graduated from University of Washington with a 3.8 GPA, no criminal record, no military service in his family. On paper, he was exactly what he appeared to be, but the evidence suggested something else entirely. Meanwhile, Morrison and his crew were planning their revenge with the single-minded determination of men whose pride had been shattered. They couldn't understand how someone half Morrison's size had disabled him so easily, but they were certain it was just luck or some kind of dirty fighting trick. "We hit him when he's alone," Morrison said, his wrist still in a cast. "All four of us, no witnesses. Beat him down properly this time." Santos nodded eagerly. "Make sure he knows his place. Maybe break something of his for real." Williams was more cautious. "What if he does that weird move again?" "He got lucky," Morrison insisted. "One lucky move doesn't make him some kind of ninja. We come at him together. He won't have a chance." O'Brien cracked his knuckles. "I want to be the one who puts him down." Nobody makes Morrison look like a fool. They didn't know that their planning session in the barracks was being monitored. Several hundred miles away, in a secure communications center, 4 Navy SEAL colonels were listening to every word through surveillance equipment that officially didn't exist. Colonel Richard Hayes, the senior officer of the group, turned to his colleagues with grim satisfaction. "They're planning a coordinated assault on our asset. That gives us everything we need to act." Colonel Sandra Thompson, the only woman in the group, studied the intelligence reports spread across their conference table. Chen's cover is blown. Those medical reports are going to raise questions throughout the command structure. "Maybe it's time to extract him," suggested Colonel Michael Davis. His mission here was intelligence gathering, not extended deep cover. Colonel James Rodriguez, brother to the staff sergeant who had first noticed Marcus, shook his head. "He's too valuable where he is, and extracting him now would raise even more questions. Better to let this play out and clean up the mess afterward." The 4 colonels represented a special unit within Naval Special Warfare Command that officially didn't exist. Their job was to place deep cover operatives in various military units to gather intelligence on security breaches, training deficiencies, and personnel problems that couldn't be detected through normal channels. Marcus Chun wasn't a recruit trying to become a SEAL. He was already one of the most highly trained operators in the entire Navy, with a mission to infiltrate and evaluate the SEAL training program from the inside. His computer science background was real, but it was only part of his story. He'd been recruited from college by the same unit that now monitored his progress. For 3 years, Marcus had undergone training that made standard SEAL preparation look like basic fitness. He'd learned languages, weapons systems, combat techniques, and intelligence gathering methods that were classified at the highest levels. His quiet demeanor wasn't natural shyness. It was the result of intensive psychological conditioning designed to make him invisible in any group. The mission at Coronado was supposed to be simple. Blend in, observe, report on any security or training issues, and extract after 6 months with recommendations for improving the program. Morrison's harassment had complicated everything. Back at Coronado, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was conducting his own investigation. His military instincts told him that Marcus Chun was more than he appeared, but he couldn't prove it. The young man's performance in training was flawless, but it was the kind of flawless that came from extensive experience rather than natural talent. "Chun," Rodriguez called out after a particularly intense combat simulation. "Stay behind for a moment." Marcus approached with the same calm expression he wore during every interaction. "Yes, Staff Sergeant. Where did you learn to fight?" "I took some martial arts classes in college, Staff Sergeant." "Nothing formal." Rodriguez studied the young man's face, looking for any tell that might reveal deception. Marcus met his gaze steadily, showing no signs of nervousness or evasion. "Some martial arts classes don't teach you how to disable someone twice your size with surgical precision." "I got lucky, Staff Sergeant." Morrison grabbed me, and I reacted instinctively. Instinctively. Rodriguez repeated the word slowly. "You know what my instincts tell me, Chun? They tell me you're not who you pretend to be." Marcus maintained his calm expression. "I'm just trying to get through training, Staff Sergeant." Rodriguez wanted to push harder, but he had no evidence beyond his suspicions. Military protocol required more than intuition to take action against a recruit who was performing perfectly in all measurable areas. "Watch yourself, Chun. Morrison and his crew aren't finished with you." "I understand, Staff Sergeant." As Marcus walked away, Rodriguez felt the frustration of knowing something was wrong, but being unable to prove it. He'd seen hundreds of recruits come through SEAL training, and Marcus Chun didn't fit any normal pattern. That evening, as Marcus cleaned his equipment in the same methodical way that had first attracted Morrison's attention, he reflected on his situation. The mission was becoming more complicated by the day. His cover was holding, but barely. Soon, someone with more authority than Staff Sergeant Rodriguez would start asking harder questions. Morrison and his crew were planning another assault, and Marcus knew he couldn't defend himself again without revealing more of his training. Each demonstration of his capabilities brought him closer to exposure. In the secure communication center, the four colonels were making their own plans. They'd given Marcus Chun an impossible mission: remain invisible while being constantly watched, maintain his cover while defending himself from harassment, and gather intelligence while avoiding any action that might compromise his identity. The mission parameters had changed. Morrison and his crew were planning a coordinated assault that could force Marcus to reveal enough of his training to destroy his cover completely. The colonels had two choices: extract their asset immediately or eliminate the threat permanently. They chose the latter. Morrison and his friends had no idea that their revenge plot had just made them targets of four of the most dangerous men in the United States military. The recruits thought they were planning to teach a lesson to a weak computer nerd who'd gotten lucky once. Instead, they were about to discover what happened when ordinary soldiers cross paths with the shadow world of military black operations. The reckoning was coming, and it would be swift, thorough, and completely deniable. Morrison's revenge plan was scheduled for Thursday night during the monthly equipment inspection. The timing seemed perfect to him and his crew. All the recruits would be busy organizing their gear. Instructors would be focused on paperwork, and the equipment areas would have plenty of secluded spots where they could corner Chun without witnesses. What Morrison didn't know was that his plan had been anticipated by people far more experienced in tactical operations than four angry recruits. The four SEAL colonels had been monitoring every conversation, every movement, every detail of the brewing conflict. They decided that Morrison and his crew represented a threat that needed to be eliminated, but it had to be done in a way that looked completely natural. Colonel Hayes briefed his team during their final planning session. "We can't just make them disappear. Too many questions, too much scrutiny. But we can engineer a situation where their own actions lead to their removal from the program and disgrace from the Navy." Colonel Thompson spread out detailed floor plans of the training facility. Chun will be in Equipment Bay 7 at 2,100 hours, conducting his normal maintenance routine. Morrison's crew plans to corner him there at 21:15. "Security cameras?" asked Colonel Davis. "Will malfunction at exactly 2,110 hours and remain offline for 30 minutes. Standard equipment failure happens all the time." Colonel Rodriguez studied the timeline. "That gives us a 5-minute window to position our people and document everything we need." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Morrison and his crew would attempt their assault, but they would find themselves facing not just Marcus Chun, but also several witnesses who would arrive at precisely the right moment to document their criminal behavior. The witnesses would be SEAL instructors who happened to be conducting surprise inspections, and their testimony would be unshakable. Marcus received his instructions through a seemingly routine equipment inspection form. Hidden in the standard military jargon were coded phrases that told him exactly what to expect and how to respond. He was to defend himself only enough to seem like a desperate recruit fighting for his life, then allow the arriving instructors to handle the situation. The hardest part for Marcus would be appearing weak and overwhelmed when his training told him to neutralize the threat efficiently. Thursday evening arrived with the usual chaos of equipment inspection. Recruits scrambled through their assigned areas, checking weapons, organizing gear, and preparing for the inevitable surprise inspections that could happen at any moment. Marcus arrived at Equipment Bay 7 at exactly 2,100 hours, as he did every Thursday. The bay was a large room filled with weapons racks, ammunition lockers, and maintenance equipment. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting the same harsh shadows that had witnessed his first encounter with Morrison. At 2,110 hours, the security camera in Equipment Bay 7 experienced a routine malfunction that would require 30 minutes to repair. The timing was logged automatically by the security system, creating an official record of the equipment failure. At 2,115 hours, Morrison and his crew entered Equipment Bay 7. This time, they were more organized. Morrison's wrist was still in a cast, but he positioned his 3 followers strategically around the room to prevent Shen from escaping. They'd planned their approach carefully, determined not to be embarrassed again by some lucky martial arts move. Well, Morrison said, echoing his words from the previous confrontation. Look who's here all alone again. Marcus looked up from the rifle he was cleaning, his expression showing exactly the right amount of fear and resignation. What do you want, Morrison? What I want is to finish what we started. Morrison stepped closer, his good hand clenched into a fist. You think you're some kind of tough guy because you got lucky once? Tonight you're going to learn the difference between luck and reality. Santos moved to block the main exit while Williams and O'Brien flanked Marcus from either side. Their positions were tactically sound for intimidating a frightened recruit, but they would prove to be exactly wrong for what was about to happen. Please, Marcus said, his voice showing just the right tremor of fear. I don't want any trouble. I'll transfer out of the program if that's what you want. O'Brien laughed harshly. Too late for that, little man. You made us look bad, and now you're going to pay for it. Morrison nodded to his crew, and they began to close in. Marcus backed against a weapons rack, appearing trapped and desperate. Everything was proceeding exactly as the 4 colonels had planned. At 2,118 hours, 3 SEAL instructors entered Equipment Bay 7 to conduct a surprise inspection. The timing was perfect. Morrison had just grabbed Marcus by the front of his uniform. Santos was moving in to pin Marcus's arms, and Williams and O'Brien were positioning themselves to prevent any escape. The instructors witnessed a clear case of 4 recruits assaulting a 5th in what could only be described as premeditated group violence. What the hell is going on here? Master Chief Peterson's voice cut through the room like a whip crack. Morrison froze, still gripping Marcus's uniform. Santos stumbled backward, suddenly realizing how bad this looked. Williams and O'Brien tried to blend into the shadows, but the room's layout made concealment impossible. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez and Petty Officer Williams, the other 2 instructors, spread out to cover all exits. Their expressions showed exactly the kind of cold fury that every recruit learned to fear during training. Step away from Chun immediately, Peterson ordered. Morrison released Marcus and stepped back, his mind racing to find an explanation that might save him. Master Chief, this isn't what it looks like. You were just committing assault with 3 accomplices in a coordinated attack on a fellow recruit, Rodriguez interrupted. In my 20 years of service, I've seen a lot of things, but this level of premeditated violence is new. Marcus slumped against the weapons rack, breathing heavily and showing all the signs of someone who just escaped a serious beating. His performance was flawless, the perfect image of a frightened young recruit who'd been saved by the timely arrival of his instructors. Chen, are you injured? Peterson asked. No, Master Chief. They just grabbed me and started threatening me. I think they were going to beat me up because of what happened last week. Santos found his voice. That's not true. He's lying. He did something to Morrison's wrist, some kind of dirty fighting. Shut up, Santos, Rodriguez said quietly. Every word you say is making this worse for you. Petty Officer Williams was documenting the scene with a camera, taking photos of the 4 recruits' positions, Marcus's apparent distress, and the overall setup that clearly showed a planned assault. Master Chief, Morrison tried again. You don't understand. Chen isn't what he seems. He knows some kind of martial arts or something. He hurt me before, and we just wanted to what? Take revenge? Commit assault? Teach him a lesson. Peterson's voice was deadly calm. Are you actually admitting to planning this attack? Morrison realized he'd just confessed to premeditated assault in front of 3 witnesses who were documenting everything. His face went white as the full implications of a situation became clear. O'Brien tried a different approach. Master Chief, we weren't really going to hurt him. We just wanted to scare him a little, maybe rough him up a bit. You know how it is with recruits who think they're better than everyone else. Rodriguez shook his head in disgust. Did you just confess to conspiracy to commit assault? Are you really that stupid? The four recruits looked around the room, finally, understanding that they'd walked into a trap of their own making. Everything they'd said and done was being documented by 3 senior SEAL instructors whose testimony would be unquestionable in any military court. Williams finished photographing the scene and looked at Peterson. Master Chief, I think we've seen enough. Peterson nodded grimly. Morrison, Santos, Williams, O'Brien, you're all under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, attempted assault, and conduct unbecoming of naval personnel. You have the right to remain silent, and I strongly suggest you exercise that right immediately. As the 4 recruits were led away in handcuffs, Marcus remained in Equipment Base 7, still playing the role of the shaken victim. The security camera would come back online in 12 minutes, documenting his presence and apparent emotional state following the incident. In the secure communication center, the 4 colonels watched the aftermath through encrypted feeds from the instructors' body cameras. The operation had proceeded exactly as planned. Morrison and his crew had been eliminated as a threat without raising any questions about Marcus's true identity. Clean and efficient, Colonel Hayes observed. No one will question why 4 recruits tried to assault a smaller colleague. It's a story as old as military training itself. Colonel Thompson was already preparing the follow-up documentation. Morrison and his crew will face courts-martial within a week. They'll be dishonorably discharged and face civilian criminal charges. They'll never be able to serve in any military capacity again. Marcus's cover remained intact, but the incident had revealed the lengths to which his handlers would go to protect their asset. For young men's military careers have been destroyed, not because they were evil, but because they'd threatened an operation they couldn't have imagined existed. The mission would continue, but Marcus now understood that he wasn't just gathering intelligence for his handlers. He was a weapon they would use against anyone who threatened their objectives, regardless of the consequences for innocent people caught in the crossfire. The courts-martial proceedings began 3 days after the incident in Equipment Base 7. Morrison, Santos, Williams, and O'Brien found themselves facing charges that would end their military careers and potentially send them to federal prison. What they could understand was how a simple plan to intimidate a weak recruit had turned into such a disaster. Captain Elizabeth Morgan, the military prosecutor handling the case, had 20 years of experience in military justice. She prosecuted everything from financial crimes to war crimes, but the Equipment Base 7 case was unusually straightforward. For defendants, 3 credible witnesses, clear evidence of premeditated assault, and confessions recorded by multiple sources. This is going to be the shortest courts-martial of my career, she told her assistant prosecutor during their case preparation. These defendants practically convicted themselves. The evidence was overwhelming. The 3 SEAL instructors had witnessed the assault attempt in progress. The defendants had confessed on camera, and their prior harassment of Marcus Chun was well documented through witness statements and medical records for Morrison's previous injury. Morrison's military-appointed lawyer, Lieutenant Commander James Foster, was facing an impossible task. His client had confessed to assault in front of 3 senior military personnel, and the physical evidence supported charges of conspiracy and premeditation. Jake, you need to understand how serious this situation is, Foster told Morrison during their pretrial meeting. You're facing dishonorable discharge, federal prison time, and a criminal record that will follow you for the rest of your life. Morrison sat across from his lawyer with his head in his hands. I don't understand how it went so wrong. We're just going to rough him up a little, show him his place. Recruits have been doing stuff like this forever. Not anymore, they haven't. And certainly not with this level of premeditation and witnesses. Tell me about Chun. What made you target him specifically? Morrison struggled to explain his hatred for Marcus. He was just so arrogant, acting like he was better than everyone else, never struggling with anything. And then when I tried to put him in his place, he did something to my wrist. I still don't know what he did, but it felt like my arm was being torn off. Foster studied the medical report on Morrison's wrist injury. The orthopedic specialist notes described a hyperextension injury that demonstrated advanced knowledge of human anatomy and martial arts techniques. It wasn't the kind of defensive move that someone learned from watching movies. Jake, I need to ask you directly. Do you think Chin set you up somehow? Is there any possibility that this whole thing was orchestrated to make you look bad? Morrison looked up with sudden hope. You think he planned this? You think he wanted us to come after him? I think there are some unusual aspects to this case that don't add up. But even if Chun somehow manipulated the situation, you still chose to assault him. That's on you and your crew, not him. The truth was that Foster had his own suspicions about Marcus Chun. The young recruit's file was almost too clean, his performance was too perfect, and his defensive capabilities were far beyond what any normal recruit should possess. But suspicions weren't evidence, and his client had still committed multiple serious crimes. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his training routine as if nothing had happened. His fellow recruits gave him a mixture of sympathy and nervous respect. Word had spread quickly about Morrison's crew being arrested, and everyone understood that Marcus had somehow survived a planned assault by 4 larger men. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez watched Marcus during training exercises, still convinced that something wasn't right about the quiet recruit. The Equipment Bay 7 incident had raised more questions than it answered. Chun, Rodriguez called out after a combat simulation. Word is you're some kind of martial arts expert now. Marcus maintained his usual calm expression. I got lucky, Staff Sergeant. Master Chief Peterson and the others arrived just in time. Lucky. Rodriguez repeated the word slowly. You seem to get lucky a lot when it comes to defending yourself. I just try to stay out of trouble, Staff Sergeant. Rodriguez wanted to push harder, but he was under strict orders from Commander Walsh to avoid any actions that might appear to be harassment of a recruit who had already been victimized by his classmates. The orders had come down through channels that Rodriguez didn't recognize, with language that suggested Marcus Chun was under some kind of special protection. When a staff sergeant with Rodriguez's experience received orders he didn't understand, he knew enough to follow them without asking questions. The trials proceeded with military efficiency. Morrison and his crew were convicted on all charges within 2 weeks of their arrest. The evidence was so overwhelming that their lawyers advised them to accept plea bargains rather than face the full penalties of court conviction. Morrison received a dishonorable discharge and 18 months in military prison. Santos, Williams, and O'Brien each received bad conduct discharges and 12 months in military prison. All 4 would carry federal felony convictions for the rest of their lives, making it nearly impossible for them to find decent employment or housing. Captain Morgan delivered the sentences with the cold satisfaction of someone who had spent her career prosecuting military personnel who betrayed their oath of service. The defendant's actions represent everything that is wrong with military culture when it goes unchecked, she said during the sentencing hearing. They conspired to assault a fellow service member for no reason other than their own insecurity and need to dominate someone they perceive as weak. This court will not tolerate such behavior. Morrison listened to his sentence with growing desperation. This isn't fair. You don't understand what really happened. Chin isn't what he appears to be. The defendant will remain silent, the military judge ordered. Your actions are documented by credible witnesses and your own confessions. There is no conspiracy here except the one you organized against Recruit Chun. As Morrison was led away to begin his prison sentence, he made one last attempt to expose what he believed was the truth. Check his file. Check his background. He's not just a recruit. He's something else. The military police dragged him from the courtroom before he could say anything more, but his words had been recorded by court stenographers and would become part of the official record. In the Secure Communications Center, the 4 SEAL colonels reviewed the transcripts of Morrison's final outburst with mild concern. He's getting close to the truth, Colonel Thompson observed. Maybe too close. Colonel Hayes shook his head. He's a convicted felon with no credibility, making wild accusations. Even if someone investigates his claims, Chin's cover documentation will hold up to any normal scrutiny. What about Rodriguez? He's still suspicious. Rodriguez will follow orders. He's a good soldier who knows better than to pursue unauthorized investigations. Colonel Davis was reviewing Marcus's mission reports. Chun is still gathering valuable intelligence about security gaps in the training program. We should let the mission continue as planned. Colonel Rodriguez agreed. The Morrison situation actually strengthens Chen's cover. Now he's seen as a victim who survived harassment, which makes him more sympathetic to instructors and fellow recruits. The four colonels had successfully eliminated a threat to their operation, but they'd also revealed the lengths to which they would go to protect their assets. Morrison and his crew had been destroyed not because they were criminals, but because they become inconvenient to a shadow operation that officially didn't exist. Marcus continued his training with the knowledge that his handlers had just demonstrated their willingness to sacrifice four young men's entire futures to maintain his cover. The mission was more important than individual lives, more important than justice, and more important than the truth. He began to wonder what would happen if he ever became inconvenient to the four colonels who controlled his life. Would they protect him as they had when he was threatened? Or would they eliminate him as efficiently as they'd eliminated Morrison and his crew? The answer to that question would determine not just the success of his mission, but whether he survived to complete it. As Morrison began his prison sentence, still insisting that Marcus Chun was more than he appeared, the four colonels prepared for the next phase of their operation. They had proven they could manipulate military justice to protect their interests. Now, they would discover what happened when someone finally uncovered the truth about their shadow unit and the operatives they placed throughout the military establishment. 6 months after Morrison's conviction, an unexpected investigation began that would expose the shadow operation the four SEAL colonels had worked so hard to protect. The investigation started not with Marcus Chun or the Equipment Base 7 incident, but with a routine audit of military personnel records that revealed discrepancies too significant to ignore. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Pierce from the Navy Inspector General's office was conducting a standard review of SEAL training records when she noticed anomalies in Marcus Chen's file. The discrepancies were subtle, dates that didn't quite match, training certifications that appeared before the courses were supposedly completed, and medical evaluations that showed conditioning levels far beyond what any recruit should possess. Pierce had built her career on noticing details that others missed. 22 years in military intelligence had taught her that the most important secrets were usually hidden in plain sight, disguised as routine paperwork and administrative errors. Something's wrong with this file, she told her assistant, Major Robert Kim. These records have been altered, but whoever did it was very good. Almost good enough to avoid detection. Kim studied Marcus's file with growing interest. What kind of alterations are we talking about? The kind that suggests someone with high-level access wanted to create a completely false identity for this recruit. Look at these dates. He supposedly completed advanced firearms training 3 months before he enlisted. His physical fitness scores show improvement patterns that are mathematically impossible for someone starting from a stated baseline. Pierce had seen similar patterns before during her years investigating military intelligence operations. False identities, backdated records, and cover stories that were almost perfect except for tiny details that revealed the truth to anyone who knew what to look for. You think Chun is some kind of intelligence asset? I think Chun is exactly what Morrison said. He was something other than a normal recruit. The question is who's running him and why. Pierce began a careful investigation, using her Inspector General authority to request records from departments that normally operated without oversight. Her first breakthrough came when she discovered that Marcus's college transcript had been altered after his graduation. The original records showed a very different student, one who'd spent 2 years in a special military science program that officially didn't exist. The program was buried so deep in classified budgets that Pierce needed special authorization just to confirm its existence. When she finally gained access to the records, she found evidence of an operation that had been placing deep cover assets throughout the military for over a decade. Marcus Chen wasn't the first operative the Shadow Unit had inserted into SEAL training. He was just the first one who had been exposed by circumstances beyond their control. Pierce's investigation led her to the 4 SEAL colonels who had orchestrated Morrison's destruction. Hayes, Thompson, Davis, and Rodriguez had been running unauthorized intelligence operations for years, using their positions to place operatives in sensitive locations throughout Naval Special Warfare Command. The Shadow Unit had operated with complete impunity because their operations were technically legal under broad intelligence authorities that few people understood. They weren't breaking laws. They were exploiting gaps in oversight that allowed them to operate without meaningful supervision. When Pierce finally confronted Colonel Hayes with her evidence, she expected denials and attempts to classify her investigation. Instead, Hayes invited her to a secure briefing room where she learned the full scope of what the Shadow Unit had been accomplishing. Lieutenant Colonel Pierce, Hayes began, what you've discovered is a counterintelligence operation that has identified and eliminated dozens of security threats throughout our military establishment. Pierce studied the briefing materials Hayes presented. The operation had uncovered foreign intelligence assets, security vulnerabilities, and personnel problems that had gone undetected through normal channels. Marcus Chen's mission at Coronado identified 17 separate security gaps in our most elite training program, Thompson added. Information that could have been exploited by foreign intelligence services to compromise our most sensitive operations. Davis showed Pierce classified reports detailing successful operations by their embedded assets. We've prevented 3 major security breaches, identified 12 potential foreign intelligence recruits, and discovered training deficiencies that could have gotten people killed in combat. Rodriguez presented the most compelling evidence, documentation showing that the Shadow Unit's operations had directly contributed to saving American lives in classified missions overseas. Pierce found herself facing a moral dilemma she hadn't expected. The Shadow Unit was operating outside normal oversight, but their results were undeniably valuable to national security. What about Morrison and his crew? Were their lives destroyed just to protect your operation? Hayes answered without hesitation. Morrison and his crew committed serious crimes that were documented by credible witnesses. They were convicted based on evidence and their own confessions. The fact that their actions threatened our operation doesn't change the fact that they chose to commit assault. But you engineered the situation that led to their arrest. We documented their criminal behavior and ensured that proper authorities witnessed it. Everything that happened to them was the result of their own choices. Pierce realized she was looking at a perfect example of how military intelligence operations blurred the lines between justice and manipulation. Morrison and his crew had chosen to commit assault, but the Shadow Unit had created the circumstances that made their crimes inevitable and ensured their punishment was swift and severe. What happens to Chun now that his cover is blown? Chun completes his training and graduates as a normal SEAL recruit, Thompson explained. His mission here is finished, and he'll be assigned to a regular unit where he can use his skills without deception. Pierce studied the 4 colonels, trying to determine whether they were patriots protecting national security or dangerous operatives who had accumulated too much power without oversight. I could recommend that this entire operation be shut down and investigated by higher authorities. Hayes nodded calmly. You could, and you'd be within your rights to do so. But you'd also be ending an operation that has proven its value through years of successful missions and documented results. Pierce spent 2 weeks reviewing the complete files of the Shadow Unit's operations. The evidence was overwhelming. They had prevented numerous security breaches, identified foreign intelligence threats, and gathered information that had saved lives in combat operations. But they had also operated without meaningful oversight, destroyed the careers of people who threatened their objectives, and accumulated power that could easily be abused for personal or political purposes. In the end, Pierce made a decision that reflected the complex realities of modern military intelligence. She recommended that the Shadow Unit continue operating, but with enhanced oversight and stricter protocols for protecting the rights of military personnel who inadvertently became involved in their operations. Marcus Chun graduated from SEAL training with honors and was assigned to a regular team where his exceptional skills were attributed to natural talent and intensive preparation. His file would forever carry subtle markers that identified him to other intelligence professionals as someone with unusual capabilities, but his cover story held. Morrison served his full prison sentence and was released with a federal felony conviction that made normal employment nearly impossible. He spent years trying to expose what he believed was a conspiracy that had destroyed his life, but his criminal record and history of violence made his claims seem like the desperate accusations of a bitter former convict. Santos, Williams, and O'Brien faced similar fates. Their military careers ended, their reputations destroyed, their futures limited by criminal records that would follow them forever. The four SEAL colonels continued their shadow operations with enhanced oversight, but undiminished effectiveness. They had proven that they could manipulate military justice to protect their interests while maintaining plausible deniability for their actions. Pierce's investigation was classified at the highest levels, its findings buried in files that would never see public scrutiny. She had uncovered a shadow war being fought within the American military establishment, where the lines between security and oppression were constantly shifting. The truth about Marcus Chun and the Equipment Bay 7 incident would remain classified for decades. Future generations might eventually learn how 4 angry recruits had accidentally stumbled into a world of military intelligence operations that operated beyond public oversight or accountability. Marcus himself never learned the full extent of what his handlers had done to protect his mission. He continued his career as a SEAL operator, using skills that officially came from intensive training, but actually reflected years of deep cover preparation for missions that would never appear in any public record. The Shadow Unit's operations continued, placing assets throughout the military establishment and gathering intelligence that shaped national security policy in ways that civilian leaders never fully understood. Morrison's final words during his sentencing had been more prophetic than anyone realized. Marcus Chun truly wasn't what he appeared to be, and the people who controlled him were far more dangerous than 4 angry recruits had ever imagined. The story of Equipment Bay 7 became a cautionary tale about military justice and the consequences of harassment and assault. But the real story of shadow operations, intelligence manipulation, and the destruction of inconvenient lives in service of classified objectives remained buried in files that few people would ever be authorized to read. Justice had been served, but not in the way that anyone involved had expected or understood.